Welcome to Registered, the podcast of the Catholic Register, where we'll be taking a look at the stories that graced all of our platforms over the past week. I'm Mickey Conlon, editor of the Register, alongside associate editor Quinton Amundson and reporter Luke Mandato. This week's episode is brought to you by the digital edition of the Catholic Register. Go to catholicregister.org to sign up for your trial subscription at no cost and no obligation. Thanks for joining me, guys. Plenty of news from around the world this week, but we'll start here at home with a troubling new report commissioned by UECTA, the Ontario English Catholic Teachers Association, and it's on the rise of violence in our schools. And when I say our schools, I mean Catholic schools in particular. Luke, you spoke with UECTA about this. What did you learn about this?
Yes, thanks, Mickey. I had a conversation with their president, Renee Jansen, in DeWall about this report that they launched. And as you said, the topic of discussion was the system under strain, which was the name of the report, a system under strain, violence and harassment in Ontario schools and specifically Ontario Catholic schools. And this report was done by the association after things they had heard from the teachers from inside the classrooms that prodded a deeper look into what's been going on. And yeah, the results were troubling, to say the least. I believe some of the main points that came out of that report is that 9 in 10 teachers have experienced or witnessed violence or harassment at school. And this is, again, strictly related to Catholic schools. Incidents are also getting more frequent, with teachers reporting an average of about 7 violent incidents a year, which was up substantially from the last survey they had conducted, and some of the circumstantial evidence of just speaking to some of the teachers through the organization there. The other findings were that women were reporting higher exposure to acts of violence. And what shocked me, Mickey, is the line, especially in kindergarten and grades 1 to 3. So I guess when we think of violence in classrooms, I don't know about you two, but I kind of picture the high school students, or the, maybe an older grade 7 or 8 student that's kind of, maybe a little bit tricky to deal with. You don't often think about it being even the younger kids nowadays, with violence and harassment towards others and teachers in classrooms. So that was something we had chatted about as well. I believe that I outlined in the original article, but of course, Renee spoke a little bit about issues with the education itself and things like funding going towards the schools. And I kind of prodded him, Mickey, and I said, it sounds like this also has a lot to do with the mental health of the students and sort of just the environment that's been created in these schools coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic. And he conceded that that definitely has something to do with it. People getting away from their screens and back out into the real world has caused some real issues. And I guess those issues are showing up now in the classrooms and on these reports.
Well, we've been hearing about the mental health issues for a number of years now, and mostly from the teachers themselves. They're seeing it. They're on the front lines. They see it more than the average person. So, did Renee have any kind of solutions for this, other than more funding? Because that's always the what it comes down to.
Yes, we definitely discussed those types of solutions, but just in a casual conversation between him and I, it was more so solutions on. I guess it's a time related thing. We're hoping that through time, I guess, that the students can sort of get back to understanding, what normal behavior looks like, especially within a classroom setting. And I guess it also comes down just to education of the staff itself, and knowing that this is a reality, knowing that mental health are things that, are always going to be prevalent, maybe more so prevalent now than before, but mental health stress, especially with the certain ages the teachers are dealing with. And it's different ages that they're exposed to all the time, right? Even if you teach in a kindergarten setting, you're in a school that has, ages going all the way up to 13-year-olds being around, right? In the hallways or even outside of the classroom. So there's definitely lots of things we could discuss in terms of solutions. Quinton, anything that comes to mind for you when looking at the findings of this report?
Well, not in terms of, solutions. I'll just say it's a very complicated, question that more than these teachers need to really get to the bottom of. I mean, the social scientists have outwardly come out and said that this is the anxious generation. I mean, they've come up with an actual terminology for it, and it's really accepted in society that there is a complete unnerving and wiriness and a little bit of problems, and a lot of it is being attributed to this, how these machines have really become a appendage of these kids in kindergarten right from the early age, and there almost has to be a very conscious effort to stop that aspect of the mental health crisis. And that's why I admire parents that are like, well, no, why should my kid have a phone when they're 5 years old? Like, what's the use of having an iPad? Like, when they could be outside playing. Like, we were able to get along, quite fine. I mean, I didn't get my first device until I was in, grade 8, and I think it's good to
Oh,
see that there are more schools starting to do a little bit more of that sort of thing, but it's so complicated. I don't really, it's difficult for these teachers that are in this position right now trying to unpack this problem, and we have to uh, pray for that they have the wisdom to figure it out.
you lucky kids. You got your first device in grade 8. Oh, you know when I got my first cell phone?
Oh,
2005. I was what? I was
2005.
41 at the time. Oh, you kids are so lucky compared to our generation, I'm telling you. So, but well, we talked anyways about the violence in schools, and we Luke, you actually made a little joke about it, how the Catholic schools up in York region were, they're almost releasing the kids when at 3 o'clock bell. It was like they'd emptied the prisons or something. And I know I went to an all guys school, and again I made the prison illusion. It was like that. You had to be as tough as you were in prison, or else someone would walk all over you. So I guess it's not a something that's absolutely new, but there does seem to be a little bit of difference. Back in our day, or my day, it was, a couple guys would have a fight, and then the fight would be over, and they'd probably be best buddies again the next day. It seems the violence is taken another step. It seems nowadays. You guys are closer to it than I was, so let me know what you think.
I think there's definitely some element of truth there, Mickey. I have no proof of whether this is the case or not, but I think you said it best, at least when I was growing up in a Catholic elementary school and a Catholic high school. Any fight that occurred or any sort of violent behavior was kind of this chip on your shoulder edge that all of the students and especially all the guys had. I don't know where that came from. Maybe it was just the feeling at the time of that age. But whenever these incidents occurred, like you said, it was a sort of a flash in the pan, and then until the next one, there wasn't really any day-to-day lingering problem. Whereas this report's underscoring that violence is sort of becoming the new normal, and I never remember violence being the norm in any of my school settings. So that is interesting to see, and it's funny you mentioned that. Um, reference to it being almost like a prison. Well, I don't think it was exactly like a letting the prisons loose. I do remember saying to a buddy of mine who was in a public school across the street from us at the time, I ran over at the end of school one day and I said, there's this big party. So and so's parents are out of town. It's going to be a bunch of people from my side of my school going. And he said, like, I'm not going to party with the Catholic kids. Those Catholic kids are crazy. He couldn't even fathom putting himself in what he considered harm's way by going out and hanging with the Catholic high school kids. And of course, he was from what we considered the rough and tumble high school in our town that was a public school, of course. So it's funny to mention, but I think it's shifted. There's no behavior like that where it's good old, roughhousing violence anymore. This seems like it's a considerable step in the wrong direction. And as Quinton said, maybe that's because of the stress, because of the anxiety this younger generation's feeling, but it definitely doesn't feel the same.
I also wonder, it's not that long ago, we had police in the schools. And a lot of it wasn't just because, to quell any violence, but, they were there as mentors. They were coaching sports teams, and they're just a voice to listen to. And then we had, the squeaky wheel got out there. They said, no, this is no good. We can't have the police in there. The police are a threat to these kids. And, what kind of bozo would come up with that idea? I have no idea. But even though there was a study that said something like 75% of the kids wanted police in the school, most of the parents did. Well, we had all these gutless politicians that, they had to put the oil on the squeaky wheel and out with the cops. They're no longer in the schools. So I wonder how much that is attributed to it. So who knows? But I guess we'll move on from here to another study that is somewhat connected. It's probably got a lot of the same issues to it, and that's a story, Quinton, you did this week on the think tank Cardis. And there's a study that says there's growing isolation amongst religious congregations. So why don't you tell us what you found in delving into that report?
Yeah, thanks, Mickey. Of course, Curtis was very interested in, studying how the nature of the problem about social isolation and loneliness, does it mirror what we see in culture? And what are they trying to do to alleviate the problem? And they do find that very similar to a lot of public reports, that public society, that 20% of the people in religious congregations, according to the priests who were surveyed for the study, are dealing with social isolation and loneliness. And of course, there's some very key groups, people who live alone, newcomers to Canada, seniors, the socioeconomically vulnerable, and people who live with disabilities among them. And it's a problem that the priests have noticed have worsened over the past 5 or 6 years. Wonder what major event happened 5 or 6 years ago that really created a lot of disruption. Hint, we're going to have the 6th anniversary the day our this episode gets unveiled, the COVID-19 pandemic. It was a big disruption, and the priests notice it, and they're trying to do things to, fix it in terms of hospitality committees and, various things to build fellowship. But it's hard because churches have a lot of problems trying to get the personnel to do all this work. So there was a multi-layered study, but I think the big top-line finding is at least 1 of 5 parishioners who we sit beside every Sunday are really dealing with social isolation and loneliness right now.
I would hazard a guess that those numbers, they're pretty well, match just society as a whole. And the same sort of thing. And again, you kind of go to that device that you hold in your hand. How much you hold that in your hand? Well, if you go back to COVID, and we'll go back and talk about the kids in school. Well, remember they were getting tablets out to all the kids. So that they could make sure that they were able to keep up with their studies, because, of course, everything was done virtually. Well, maybe that wasn't such a good idea after all. I guess you had to do it because no one was going to school, but it's unleashed a bit of a beast. And I can remember just with my own grandkids and how they were just glued to it, and they were just zombies. And well, actually, one of the kids was, peeing their pants, because they were just so glued to it, they couldn't get up and go to the washroom because absolutely glued. She was very, very young at the time, of course, but it was weird. And then some of the stuff she was watching on these YouTube videos, and oh my God, they were something else. And then it was like they were becoming her friends. It was like she had no other friends. So, what
very
kind of
much.
experience did you guys see in that?
Well, it was very difficult. I mean, like my sisters, one of my sisters and my brother-in-law, I mean, they had to, teach. I mean, they're teachers, so I mean, they were trying to, manage this whole situation, trying to teach virtually, and it is just so difficult because, you're not able to really service, kids that maybe have, special needs or particular realities, through a computer screen. Unlike, so people naturally fell through the cracks, and we are seeing a lot of developmental, challenges in terms of reading and writing, but also just, socialization. But what's, interesting enough, even kind of broadening the study, seems like a lot of adults forgot to socialize too,
Yes.
because of COVID. So it's, like I think we're going to just see more and more studies about how we made some, kind of rash decisions, and we're dealing with the long-term consequences right now.
We are definitely dealing with the consequences, Quinton. I remember getting home from school. It would have been before March break. Yeah, exactly, almost to the week. And I remember seeing the news that they were going to shut the schools for an extra week or 2 weeks. I forget what
Two
the time
weeks.
was.
Oh,
Two
yeah.
weeks to flatten the curve, I think was the
Yeah,
slogan.
flatten the curve.
I was texting my high school sweetheart at the time, and I said, "This is the best news ever. We get an
Yeah.
extra 2 weeks off. I'm coming over tonight. It's going to be great." And what slowly, what started as 2 weeks to flatten the curve became, one of the biggest hits on social isolation and just on the way we interact with people. I think as far as anyone can remember, it went from this is a minor inconvenience to everything we know has changed. And you guys talked about it, whether it's with a family member or with a family member that's working in education. I'm sure everyone has a story how this impacted them. I remember having to wake up and tune in to mass live stream on my phone.
Yeah.
We couldn't even get into church to. We want to talk about what impacts your spirit and your how you feel day to day. I don't think we went to church for as long as we could until they were letting people back in slowly. That's just
Especially in
one aspect.
Ontario, we were shut down more than anyone, it seems. Right?
Yeah, yeah. It was a strange time. And I have a photo on my phone still that I pull back up. It's a photo of me in 2020 with the caption says something like, "I can't wait to see in 5 or 10 years time what these decisions, what this pandemic does to our society." And I look
Yeah.
at that now and I'm saying, well, all I have to do is look around now and I can see the result of that now. So yeah, it's interesting.
Well, it's one of the funny things. I've joke about it with some of the guys that I was on the beach in Florida recently, and it's spring break, and there's groups of guys and groups of gals. And I remember back in my day, especially we'd be going up to Wasaga Beach, the Great Wasaga Beach back in those days, and if there was groups of guys and groups of gals, well, they were all checking each other out and mingling and everything. I saw none of that here. It was just all these groups stayed together, and it was almost going to be like, well, how about I throw you give you her phone number at least, or her Facebook page, or her Instagram, whatever, and then you can communicate with them. So, uh, I guess we're going to find out. We're going to see how things go. We'll adapt. We're humans. We usually do. Let's just hope that is the case this time. So time will tell. So, well, we can't go on delving into the news of the week without going to that big kerfuffle that's happening over in the Middle East. So, of course, in Iran. Well, we all seem to think we know what's going on there, and do we really? And if you believe some of the media out there, well, U.S. President Donald Trump doesn't even know what's going on there in his excursion, as he called it yesterday when I was watching the news. So some of these media are saying he knew how to start a war, but not how to get out of it. Of course, we're only 2 weeks into this excursion or this war. And correct me if I'm wrong, there aren't that many wars that are wrapped up in just a few days. And let's face it, this is no one and done strike. The U.S. and Israel, they're in it to see the end of the Iranian regime. That's going to take time, unless by some miracle the bombs all of a sudden stop dropping. The Pope is one of them that is hoping for that. He's come out on more than one occasion demanding a return to diplomacy. Bishops around the world, including our own, concur. And that's as we would expect it. But the reality on the ground, however, and Quinton, you spoke to some folks at the Age of the Church in Need and some other groups about this reality on the ground, and in particular for Christians. What did you find?
Yeah, thanks, Mickey. Regina Lynch, head of ACN International, had a message to share about how whenever there are these entanglements in the Middle East, there are a lot of deleterious effects on Christians. I mean, they seem to kind of get caught up in the crossfire, whether it be, right on the ground in Iran or in Lebanon or Iraq. I mean, there has been some incidents already with bombs hitting, complexes run by Christians in northern Iraq that were housing refugee families that had to leave their homeland because of the ISIS uprising in 2014. And I mean, there have also been a lot of anxiety for Christians in Syria and Gaza and Palestine and the West Bank. And her message is whenever there is this intervention, the people over there, they tend to really have a lot of ire towards the Christians because they view the West as predominantly, still Christian nations. So they want to maybe have the Christians in the Middle East as the scapegoats. So there's a lot more mistrust, there's a lot more intimidation. And it's a very difficult time for there to be threats against Christians because already the numbers have just plummeted so extreme. I mean, Iraq alone, before the 2003 Iraq invasion, they clocked it at about 1.5 million Christians living there. And now it's between 150,000 to 400,000. I mean, it's, kind of various groups give out various ranges, but it's a pretty steep decline. So
Then this is, of course, where Christianity originated.
Exactly. To that over 2,000 years ago. I mean, like St. Thomas was involved in Christianizing those people. But you have the other side of it, International Christian Concern. They're a watchdog as well, and they're talking about the really good that could come if Christians are liberated by this, regime, and they are very much in favor of the intervention. And they are. I asked, Sean Wright, the president, like, what do you think of what Pope Leo had to say? And he said, "I'm all for peace." But, there's been so many things tried with this regime for 47 years that, we've come to this moment. And this operation represents a way to realize that better future for Christians. So there's various groups with various messages right now, but we have to be cognizant about what Christians are going through.
Well, I would think most of us are probably looking at it from both sides, and where we agree with the Pope, we'd like to, but we kind of do see that reality that Sean Wright says, there's no talking any sense into this regime. And of course, it's very recently you've done stories about Christianity rising in Iran. So they're always under threat under a regime like it's in Iran. So it's hard to say, but you always want peace, but I guess sometimes it's just not possible. So.
No, we have to definitely see where this all goes. But I mean, of course, all the leaders that I talk to of these organizations, I mean, of course, they always are called for aid, but it's prayer. But I mean, the good news is, if we do see, an end already, I heard from Sean Wright, he is talking with fellow organizations about how they really want to flood Iran with humanitarian aid and Bibles because they know the liberating power of the Bible. So what a scenario that would be if that comes to pass, and that's what we really hope would be the optimal outcome out of what's going on right now. But pray, wait, because we, like you said at the beginning, none of us know what's going on here. None of us know, and we're not meant to know. We just have to kind of trust in the Lord.
Yeah. Well, we can only hope, as you say, there will be some peace, but we'll see. I'm sure we'll be talking about this again next week and the week after and probably the week after. So we'll see. So what I can tell you for sure, what we will be talking about next week, it was our big coverage this week in the paper, but we're going to hold on to this for the 50th anniversary of the launch of Share Life, which happens on March 19th. So next week, we will probably be putting this up online on March 19th. We've got a special guest, and that is Arthur Peters, the executive director of Share Life. And the three of us are going to talk to him about the conversations we've had about 50 years of Share Life. And we're going to dedicate probably the whole episode of Registered to Arthur and Share Life next week. So please tune in for that. And I'd like to thank you for tuning in for this week's edition. We hope you will tune in again every week that we put this out. We're always looking for new listeners, and God bless you for those who do. So thank you guys for joining. Remember, you can catch all the news at catholicregister.org, where you can also go to find the digital edition of the Catholic Register, and you can sign up for your trial subscription at no cost and no obligation. So again, thanks for tuning in to hear us.